The diner was nearly empty. 3 a.m. Just a waitress wiping tables, a cook in the back, and Paul McCartney, sitting alone in a booth by the window, staring out at the empty street, not eating, not drinking, just sitting, looking lost, looking broken, looking like someone who'd given up on something, on everything. John walked in first, saw him, stopped, the relief of finding him mixed with concern about what he'd find once they talked. Paul had been missing for 6 hours, since the argument, since the studio session fell apart, since everything that had been building for months finally exploded. They'd searched everywhere, called everyone, driven through London looking, desperate, worried, and here he was, at a random diner, alone, at 3 a.m., looking like someone who'd lost everything that mattered. George and Ringo came in behind John, saw Paul, the same relief, the same concern. They slid into the booth, surrounding him, not saying anything, just being there, waiting for Paul to speak, to explain, to tell them what was happening, what he was thinking, what he'd decided. Paul looked at them, eyes red, exhausted, and said something that made them all go silent, not with shock, not with anger, but with understanding, with sadness, with the recognition that something had changed, something fundamental, something that could never be undone. And what Paul said in that diner at 3 a.m. would mark the beginning of the end, would start the process that would eventually tear the Beatles apart. Not immediately, but inevitably, because some words can't be unsaid, some truths can't be ignored, some changes can't be stopped. This is that story. January 9th, 1969, London Abbey Road Studios, 9 p.m. The Get Back sessions were falling apart. The Beatles were supposed to be recording, creating, making music, but instead they were fighting, arguing, barely tolerating each other. The brotherhood that had defined them was crumbling. The magic that had made them the Beatles was dying, and everyone could feel it. Everyone knew it. Nobody wanted to admit it. Paul was pushing hard, trying to keep things together, trying to maintain standards, trying to make great music. But it felt like he was the only one who cared, the only one trying. John was distracted, distant, more interested in Yoko than in the Beatles. George was resentful, tired of being treated as lesser, tired of his songs being dismissed, tired of being in John and Paul's shadow. Ringo was caught in the middle, trying to keep peace, trying to hold together something that was already broken. That night, the argument started over something small, a chord progression, a tempo, something trivial, but it escalated, became about everything, about respect, about effort, about whether anyone still cared, about whether the Beatles still mattered, about whether they should even continue. Paul wanted perfection, wanted everyone to care as much as he did, wanted the Beatles to be what they'd always been. John wanted freedom, wanted to do his own thing, wanted to stop pretending they were still four friends making music when they were really four separate people barely connected. George wanted recognition, wanted his songs recorded, wanted to be treated as equal instead of as backup. Ringo just wanted everyone to stop fighting, to remember what they'd been, what they'd meant to each other, what they'd built together. The argument got heated. Words said that shouldn't be said, accusations made that couldn't be taken back. Paul called John uncommitted. John called Paul controlling. George said he was tired of being ignored. Ringo said maybe they should just quit. Maybe it was over. Maybe they should stop pretending. Paul froze, looked at them, at his brothers, at the people he'd spent his entire adult life with, the people who'd been everything, and saw strangers, saw people who didn't want to be there, who didn't want to be Beatles anymore, who were ready to walk away from what he thought was the most important thing in the world. He left, didn't say anything, just walked out of the studio, out of Abbey Road, into the London night, cold, dark, empty, like how he felt. He walked for hours, through streets he'd known his entire life, past places that held memories, the pub where they'd celebrated their first hit, the corner where they'd been photographed 1,000 times, the studio where they'd made magic. All of it felt distant now, like it belonged to someone else, to the Beatles of the past, not to who they were now, not to these four strangers fighting in studios, destroying what they'd built. He thought about quitting, about being the one who walked away. Who said it was over? Who killed the Beatles? Would that make him the villain? The one who gave up? The one who couldn't handle it? Or would it make him the honest one? The brave one? The one willing to admit truth when everyone else was living in denial? He thought about his father, about what he'd say. "You're a Beatle, son. That's who you are. You can't just walk away from that." But maybe he could. Maybe he had to. Maybe being a Beatle wasn't who he was anymore. Maybe it was who he'd been. Past tense. History. Over. At 3 a.m., he found himself at a diner. All-night place. Cheap. Empty. The kind of place where people go when they have nowhere else to be. When they can't go home, can't face reality, can't accept what's happened. He sat in a booth, by the window, ordered coffee he didn't drink, and stared at the street, at the empty city, at the world that would keep going even though his world had ended. The Beatles found him there, had been searching for hours, worried, scared, not about him running away, but about what his leaving meant, about whether he'd come back, about whether he'd decided to quit, to walk away, to be the one who ended it, who said it was over, who killed the Beatles. John slid into the booth across from him. George beside Paul, Ringo next to John, surrounding him, not trapping him, supporting him, being there, like they'd always been there, even when things were hard, even when they fought, even when they didn't know how to fix it. They were still brothers, still connected, still the Beatles, even if just barely. "We've been looking for you," John said quietly. "Been worried." Paul didn't look at them, kept staring out the window. "I can't do this anymore." Silence. Heavy silence. The words they'd all been thinking, but nobody wanted to say. The truth they'd been avoiding. The reality they'd been denying. "Can't do what?" George asked, though he knew. They all knew. This. The fighting, the pretending, the trying to force something that doesn't exist anymore. We're not the Beatles. Not really. Not the way we were. We're four people who used to be close, who used to love making music together, who used to be brothers. But we're not that anymore. We're strangers, forcing ourselves to work together because we're supposed to, because we're the Beatles, because everyone expects it. But it's killing us. It's killing me. And I can't do it anymore. More silence. Nobody arguing. Nobody denying. Because he was right. They all felt it. All knew it. All understood. The Beatles were over. Had been over for a while. They'd just been pretending, performing, maintaining the illusion for fans, for the world, for themselves. But the truth was undeniable, unavoidable. The magic was gone. The love had died. The brotherhood had ended. "So what do we do?" Ringo asked. Voice small, scared. "Do we quit? Do we announce it's over? Do we just walk away from everything we built?" Paul finally looked at them. Really looked. At John, at George, at Ringo, at his brothers, at the people who'd been his entire world, who'd defined his life, who'd made him who he was. "I don't know. I don't know if we quit, if we try to fix it, if we just limp along until it completely falls apart. I just know I can't keep pretending, can't keep forcing it, can't keep trying to make something work that doesn't want to work. It's too hard. It hurts too much. It's destroying what we were, what we meant to each other. Better to admit it's over than to let it rot. Better to end it with some dignity than to keep fighting until we hate each other." John looked down. "I know I haven't been present, haven't been committed. I've got other things, other interests. Yoko, my own music, my own life. And I know that's hurt you, hurt the band. But I can't pretend anymore either. Can't pretend I want to be a Beatle the way I used to. Can't pretend this is still my priority, my passion, my life. I've changed. We've all changed. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's natural. Maybe fighting the change is what's destroying us." George nodded. "I'm tired. Tired of fighting for recognition, for respect, for my songs to be heard, for my voice to matter. I love you guys, love what we built, but I need to be more than the quiet Beatle, more than John and Paul's backup. And I can't be that here, not anymore, not the way things are. Ringo's eyes were wet. I don't want it to end, don't want to lose this, lose you guys, lose what we were. But I also can't stand the fighting, the tension, the way we treat each other now, like enemies instead of brothers, like we're competing instead of collaborating. Maybe Paul's right. Maybe trying to force it is making it worse. Maybe we need to let go. Even though it hurts, even though it feels like dying. They sat there, 4 brothers, 4 people who'd been everything to each other, who'd changed music, changed culture, changed the world, sitting in a cheap diner at 3 a.m., acknowledging what they'd been avoiding, admitting what they'd been denying, accepting what they'd been fighting. The Beatles were over, not in that moment, not officially, but over in the way that mattered. The love was gone. The magic had died. The brotherhood had ended. And sitting there, together one more time, they mourned what they'd lost, what they'd been, what they'd never be again. We still have the rooftop concert, John said quietly. One more performance. One last time we're the Beatles. Really the Beatles. Should we do it? Should we give them one more moment, one last memory, before we let it end? Paul nodded. Yes. One more time. One last performance. Then we figure out what comes next, how to end it, how to walk away, how to stop being the Beatles while still being brothers, while still loving each other, while still respecting what we built. Because we do still love each other, right? Even though it's ending, even though it hurts, we still love each other. Always, John said, we'll always love each other. Always be connected. Always be Beatles. Even if we're not the Beatles, even if the band ends, we're brothers. That doesn't end. That can't end. That's forever. They left the diner together, 4 a.m., the night giving way to dawn, walked back to their cars, separately but together, changed but connected, ending but not ended. 16 days later, they performed on the rooftop. One last time, one final performance, one goodbye to the Beatles as they'd been. Then the slow dissolution, the lawsuits, the separation, the end. But that night in the diner, that moment of honesty, that admission of truth, that was the real ending. Not angry, not bitter, just sad, just accepting. Just 4 brothers acknowledging that sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes caring means accepting the end. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stop fighting, stop forcing, stop pretending, and let something beautiful die with dignity instead of destroying it with denial. Years later, in interviews, they'd all talk about that night and about finding Paul, about what he said, about the silence that followed, about the understanding that came, about the mourning they shared. That was the moment, Paul said. Not the rooftop, not the lawsuits, not the announcement. That 3 a.m. diner conversation. That was when the Beatles ended. When we finally admitted what we'd been denying. That it was over. That forcing it was killing us. That love sometimes means letting go. It hurt so much. But it was necessary. It was honest. It was real. And that honesty, that truth, that's what saved our friendship, what kept us brothers. Even after we stopped being the Beatles, January 9th, 1969, the Beatles found Paul alone at a diner at 3 a.m., and what he said made them all go silent, not because it was shocking, but because it was true. I can't do this anymore. 4 words, simple words, honest words, words that marked the beginning of the end, that started the process of letting go, of accepting the death of something beautiful, of mourning together before separating. That's what love looks like sometimes. Not fighting to hold on, but having the courage to let go, to admit it's over, to end something with truth instead of destroying it with lies. That's the lesson. That's the gift. That's what Paul taught them that night. Honesty, truth, the courage to admit when something's over. When fighting is hurting more than helping. When love means letting go instead of holding on. It's hard, it's painful. It feels like dying, but it's necessary, it's real. It's the only way to end something beautiful without destroying it completely. To say goodbye without saying you hate each other. To stop being the Beatles while still being brothers. That's everything.